大家好，我是吉米言。5月30号的时候，BC 律政厅出版了如何投票 How We Vote 关于2018年比例制选举公投的一份报告。那么在这份报告中间呢，也提到了在10月22号到11月30日2018年这个期间呢，比例制公投的选票会被发放到每一户人家，并且呢也会在这个期间得到收集。那么今天呢，我很有幸跟2位嘉宾呢，在对比例制选举的议题进行一次辩论形式的讨论。So let me introduce our two guests. Jashan Singh came to Canada from Punjab, India at the age of 5 with his parents. He is a graduate from UBC majoring in political science and is now pursuing his Master of Arts in Development Practice at Harvard University. Jashan is not only passionate about matters like integration of immigrants, women's empowerment, conservation of water, and creating affordable housing. He is also concerned about improving democracy and the representation in Canada and worldwide. Shawn Wade obtained his Bachelor of Arts first-class honors in history from Simon Fraser University and Bachelor of Laws and Master of Laws from UBC. Shawn is a dedicated Chief Executive, Army officer, and youth development leader with over 3 decades of volunteer community service experience. Shawn is currently the president of the Royal Commonwealth Society Mainland of BC branch. Shawn's interest in the Commonwealth began at an early age and was motivated by his lifelong interest in history. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So according to the recommendations of Attorney General, the referendum ballot questions are recommended as follows. Question 1. Which electoral system should British Columbia use for elections to the Legislative Assembly? So you have one choice. The current first-past-the-post voting system or a proportional representation voting system. The second question is, if British Columbia adopts a proportional representation voting system, which of the following voting system do you prefer? A. Dual member proportional, DMP. B. Mixed member proportional, MMP. And the third one and the last one is rural-urban proportional representation system. So there are 4 key principles stressed by the Attorney General and in the report. That is proportionality, local representation, simplicity, and the size of the Legislative Assembly. Meaning, the ballot must provide for generally proportional results, but not at the expense of other key principles and values identified in the public engagement. And the referendum ballot must respect British Columbians' desire for local representation in all areas of the province and balance the particular needs of urban and rural areas. And the ballot and the referendum must not be too complicated to be effectively communicated to voters or for voters to use if adopted. Now the last one is the referendum ballot must not require a significant increase in the member of Legislative Assembly, members of the MLAs and member of Legislative Assembly. And now let the debate discussion begin. We formed a motion for today's discussion. So that is, British Columbia should use a proportional representation voting system for elections to the Legislative Assembly. Jashan is the proponent of the motion, and Shawn is the opponent of the motion. So we'll start the discussion from the opposition. 87 countries in the world officially use some form of a proportional representation PR voting system. So why is the first-past-the-post voting system still better for British Columbia than a PR system? So Shawn, now you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Jimmy, and I'm glad you asked me that. Well,
I guess there's always the draw of history. Certainly, the country's institutions in this country are exactly the same almost as those in Britain and the UK. So I think it's interesting that the two countries that have almost the closest political institutional interlocking, and Australia and New Zealand have diverged somewhat, still use this system, so we certainly are in good company there. I think there's the historic issue, there's the regional issues, and again, some of these are covered by the report, but we certainly have some very small communities in British Columbia with some incredibly difficult and different needs, and I think that that's catered best by the local representatives, so the first past the post system works there. I certainly think that the aspect of the first past the post system of the popular vote, you don't, I think, overrepresent, I would say, the urban areas. Certainly this current government was elected in the suburbs of Vancouver because a few people were disenfranchised with the previous government, so they switched their votes. But you're not overwhelmed, I think, with a proportional representation system. The needs of the larger urban centers, because that's where all the people are voting, I think will influence, I think, the potential for local representation. So I think the local representation, the regional nature and character of our province, the regional nature and character of Canada, to be truthful, with its very tiny pockets of population, its very diverse little groups, I think are catered to better by the current first past the post system than a pure list system, certainly, which is not necessarily one of the options up for discussion. I certainly think that we have a great deal of use in the current system. It keeps, as I say, it keeps the minority groups in the different regions able to be represented in the legislature. And I think really it allows, I think it's about making it a group decision, not having people on Robson Street tell people on Main Street in Spuzzum who their local representative is, and I think there is the danger with that. Why other countries have moved to that for various reasons, I guess, known only to themselves. I mean, New Zealand is an example where they did go from the current, something similar to our system to a different system. Australia uses a very different system for they use ranking the candidates and a compulsory voting in their House of Representatives, lower house elections. There's a form of PR in the Senate. I think it's the there's a strange name that the Australians have for their own particular system where no seat is safe, and they're currently having some problems in the Senate, or were a year or two ago in what they call the feral Senate, where the Senate was kind of running away with things. So I think looking at a lot of countries that have a different system, I don't see that they're any happier with the quality of representation than we are currently here. The biggest thing besides local candidates and local representatives that I like about our current system is that it allows for broad tent parties as opposed to the small tent parties. And that is, in a society like Canada, where there are lots of little pockets of people and little interest groups that need to be catered to, be they regional, be they ethnic, be they historic, having parties and having candidates with ideas to help all of society is far better than people just playing to their little base. And I certainly think it keeps it in power. In looking at your electoral system, it's not only is this group or this interest or that interest represented in Parliament, it's what kind of government do you form and what kind of legislation do you have. And I think a broad-tented, broad church kind of party system where there are supposedly policies for all, and where you are forced to get the votes of all the electorate, not just the 5% that are going to give you the 5 seats that are going to get you in there. I think it's a better system than having everyone with a little tiny party, and there's often not that much difference between many of them, but they want their chance of getting their 3 seats in the legislature and holding sway. So for these reasons, I think it works better, especially, as I say, the regional nature of our province, where you have Greater Vancouver, which is 60% of BC's population, and growing. It will grow. It will be a mega city, from Horseshoe Bay to Hope one of these days, whether we like it or not. And then you have the whole rest of the province, which will be sort of held hostage by the southwest of the province. And while they have Peace River, at one time you had in the old days, the Peace River, I think Peace River South, it was like a big chunk of the province, one MLA serving an awful lot of land, even though there was the same number of people as in a smaller riding. And I think their concerns are so different. And I think that the current system, I think, is better than having a bunch of people in Vancouver putting people on a ballot and having 60% of the votes are going to be cast in Greater Vancouver unless they all stay home from the polls. So they're going to elect not only their representatives, but they're going to influence the complete composition of the legislature. And of course, because they've got a lot of the seats to begin with, they're going to drive the policy. I think it's going to disenfranchise more people than it enfranchises.
All right. And then on the ballot, British Columbians invited to choose a proportional representation voting system out of 3 choices. if British Columbia were to adopt one. So there are dual member proportional DMP, mixed member proportional, and then the rural-urban proportional representation. So which one is the best, or which one is the worst form of proportional representation voting system among the three?
Thank you for your answer, Jimmy. Before I answer which of the three is the best proportional representation system, may I address a couple of the things that my friend Shawn said?
Sure.
So before anything, why are we looking for a change? Robert Dahl, Sterling Professor of Political Science at Yale, he made a criteria for democracy. What criteria must be met if the democracy is healthy? One of them is effective participation. We want people to be voting. We want them to have trust in our system. As we look at BC, in the 1970s, 1980s, we had nearly 70% turnout. We had possibilities of 80 or even higher percent turnout. And in the past few elections, it's been close to half, 49, 55%. In the last election, it was 61%. That increase is partially due to the increased interest in going to a proportional representation system that studies from across the world, and as well as the examples in Northern Europe, where people are very happy, reporting the happiest quality of life, where they have the PR systems that may be tied to increased feelings of representation among the population due to the electoral system. Second, our closest ties, I would say, are definitely with Britain, but also with the United States. The United States has an FTTP system that is a bit more advanced, so people are also able to select their leader. People are able to vote for their president at the national level. And so if we are to keep an FTTP in BC, would we consider that there are also improvements needed for BC as the United States have made? And your question, what is the best of the three proposed systems? Mixed member proportional representation, rural-urban proportional representation, and dual member proportional representation. The first one, I think you listed dual member as first. Dual member representation is where all the ridings in BC would be possibly increased in size a bit, and each riding would have two people. You would never have the case where, let's say 51% of the people vote for one person, 49% of the people vote for the second person, and only one wins. And there's a big side that's left angry, feeling marginalized, feeling like their issues aren't heard. So we could have both people win in that case. If there are 5 candidates and 2 of them clearly stand out, those 2 would be the representatives of that riding. The second one, mixed proportional representation system, has even more members. Ridings would have to be increased in size even more. It wouldn't be only 2 representatives that would win. It could be many people. It could be 4 up to even 10 members. And the third one, rural-urban proportional representation. This one is where urban areas such as Vancouver, Surrey, Victoria, they would have the multiple member system where multiple winners would be chosen. Again, the benefit is that not everyone would feel like they went to the ballot, their vote was wasted just because their candidate placed second or third. There would be multiple people and they could approach anyone for their issues. And the rural areas would keep their existing system, so there would only be 1 representative. And I believe out of these 3, the dual member proportional representation system is the very best.
Okay.
The reason being, in the rural-urban proportional representation system, the problem is that many of the rural ridings, many of the middle-sized ridings would stay with 1 representative. There wouldn't be much of a change. Urban areas would have the multiple representative system, but the rural and the middle-sized ridings would have the same 1 member. That's not much of a difference. It wouldn't fulfill the democratic criteria of proportionality that you mentioned in the start. The second, mixed member proportional representation system. Although there is an issue with that how many people would represent each riding? Would it be 10 people? Would we need 20 people? How many would people be happy with? The Attorney General has recommended, I believe, and one of the other officers in the Chief Electoral System for Canada also recommended, if we were going to do the mixed member proportional representation system, the number of total representatives should stay the same. There are 87 people in the Legislative Assembly, and those members should stay at 87. Ridings can be increased in size, ridings can be decreased in size. And the issue with that is, if your riding is significantly bigger, are the people who are elected really able to represent the people who voted for them? How big is the riding? What about in areas where there's a sparsely dispersed population? Who would they contact? Would the person who they really want to contact, who is representing their issue, really even be close to their home? Would it be someone very far away in a large riding? And the third, dual proportional representation system, I believe is the best because it is a hybrid of the two. You are not increasing the number of members providing so much that some members might have their offices so far away that you can't approach them for issues in person. And you are also not making basically no change like the rural-urban proportional representation system where most of BC geography would make no change. They would still be in the FTTP system. The dual-member proportional representation system, there are studies from political science faculty associate Professor Dr. Tillman of Chicago's DePaul University. 2013, he did a study called Pre-Electoral Coalitions and Voter Turnout that he found the dual-member proportional representation system would increase the voter turnout overall. He also found this for the mixed-member proportional representation system. But other studies show that the dual-member also increases the ability for representatives to represent the people who voted for them. They are closer. It's not like mixed member where they're far away. And they're also more attached to the local issues because you have more than one person winning, two people. And the issues that may not be heard, may not be important to one side of the voters are also heard because the second most popular also wins. So I definitely recommend the dual member proportional.
And currently there is a argument that the DMP system is untested. And what's your reaction?
Well, my reaction is that the rural-urban proportional representation is also basically untested. I haven't heard of it in any of the popular countries. In Northern Europe, they have a lot of very, very successful mixed-member proportional representation systems. And to implement that in BC is a bit difficult because, again, with our geography, BC alone is much bigger than many of the Northern European countries combined. Yeah. So with our geography, if we have massive ridings like them, in their geography, they have small ridings which they consider massive, and if we have massive ridings which are in size, they're very big, it would be hard for people, especially in the rural areas, to approach their representatives if their office is at one end of the riding and they live at another end of the riding. So dual member, where it's only two people and we keep the riding sizes smaller, is more accessible to the local people. As I said, the studies have shown by Dr. Tillman and Professor Freeman. I will give the quotations after. Professor Freeman also found that the ability for representatives to meet the needs and the communication needs of their people are the best with the dual member proportion system. Candidates.
Okay, so let's get back to Shawn. And you mentioned about your concern with the ridings and also BC, British Columbians in different areas, rural areas. And then will the urban and rural, the mixed system address your concern and solve these problems?
It would certainly be a little bit better. I mean, I listened to some of these arguments. I read quite a bit up last night, and it's like, I think people seem to have this kind of misconception. I mean, essentially, when you choose a leader, what is it? This is a job interview. There's one position, one candidate. When 10 people apply for a job, the other 9 people don't walk away. Well, they feel it sucks you don't get the job, but they understand there's one position, one candidate. So I don't see why you're representing Parliament is any different. So certainly, we are not Sweden. So I think what works in Sweden, because they're a different kind of society than we are, we're more individualistic, less collectivist than Northern Europe. So I would say, I don't know. Culturally, I think we're a little different. We have the frontier and the Wild West. When you move outside of Hope, it's a lot like something out of the frontier. Anyway, so also the American system is very interesting because they do this also at the state level. We do have this at the local level, I might add, where you do elect a mayor. But I mean, we're not a presidential system. It's a parliamentary monarchy. It's be taken at once. And so really, what is an election? It's a call for ideas and suggestions and input. And so we all give our input, and then you tally the input. That's the count. The person with the input, the most input at the end, well, that's the one you go with. It's no different than any kind of fact-finding mission or any kind of job interview. You total, if it's a fair job interview, you look at the candidates, and they hand them their things. People give their input. In the end, it's like a focus group or something. Okay, well, the one that has the most positives or the most support wins. It's just how that works. So you're expressing your choice, but that doesn't mean that just because 5 of you want this and 5 of you want that you can only sometimes, only one can win sometimes. But your vote isn't wasted. You've expressed your opinion. You've participated in the discussion. This time, there were more people who went with the other idea, and so that's the one we go with. Maybe your turn will happen next time. In the previous election, people voted for the Liberals, people voted for the NDP, people voted for the Greens. There were more Liberal members elected, and they got to form the government. This time, it was kind of a hung parliament with the Greens' help. You have an NDP government. That's just how it works sometimes. The pendulum swifts back and forth, right? recognize that some of my support, I think the DPP is actually the least of the three evils, because I think at least you get a local representative. I mean, my personal opinion is that they should scrap the last RAS criterion, add 10 seats to the legislature, keep the current system, and then you can rank your party, and then if you get 10% of the vote, you get at least a seat in the legislature. I think that would satisfy both, and I think it would solve most of the problems that we see. I see nothing particularly wrong with the current system. We vote. People have talked about online voting. People have talked about changing the system, and maybe even as simple as what they have in the municipal election, which should make it easier, which is having elections on weekends, so people could come and vote, might make it easier. I don't know, or certainly have the polling over several days, which is something which happens in India, which used to happen in Britain, and I think in Canada years ago, might make it easier for people to vote. Of course, we have the advance polls now as well. So I think that those would be better changes, but I certainly like the aspect of rural-urban. But if you're going to keep first past the post in the rural areas, why not just keep it in the urban areas?
And then, are you saying the peer voting system is going to enhance party politics? And so is that harmful to British Columbia?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it is in a way, because parties will be, your chance of getting single issue parties or parties that are smaller, the smaller parties, increase. Now, again, we all talk about making it's like at good old ancient Athens or France in the philosophe times. We sit around here thinking, well, what is the perfect system for our legislature? But in the end, Parliament is fine, but it's government. You've got to be able to get legislation system. We have a situation in the BC legislature where the votes were so close under our current system, and really what you see is gaming and playing and game playing. You look at parliaments in Italy, you look at parliaments in other places where it is all first past the post system. The policies of the government are overwhelmingly influenced by the coalition partners and the small parties, and if they solidarity, they can wield, I would think, an unreasonably large influence over the government's policies. And again, I mean, you want the votes, you cave in, but I think that you'll see a lot more game playing. I look at, they went to the polls.
So that, however, that means a first past the post system can also produce an anomaly, is that right?
It's happened before.
It happened before. And then,
but you've got ridings. I mean, that has to be an anomaly, that you've got to have very long coattails. So, I mean, you look at Trudeau-mania in 1968, that was an anomaly. I mean, lots of Liberals elected in British Columbia. When's the last time that's happened? So when you have a candidate that's loved and popular, or that people want to support, you see an anomaly. So,
all right, so move to the proposition and then the proponent of the motion. Interestingly, the 2018 Electoral Reform Referendum Report, that How We Vote, quoted the New Zealand electoral system 9 times in the report. And however, the general election turnout in New Zealand for 2014 was around 80%. On the contrary, and you also quoted that number, in 2017 the turnout for the BC provincial election was only 61%. And that alone, 61%, is already a 15% increase than the previous provincial election, right? And so is a low turnout rate also a factor that exacerbates the electoral result that rewards political parties with disproportionate seats and hence political power? If yes, how would an electoral system reform succeed without some compulsory voting mechanism in place that enhances or guarantees a higher turnout in British Columbia?
So I'm going to break that into little parts.
Okay.
First, we are concerned that there has been low voter turnout in BC.
Yeah.
It wasn't always like this. As I mentioned earlier, in the 1970s, it used to be 80%. If you look at India's recent elections, their voting turnout has been over 80, sometimes 90%.
Yeah.
And we want people to participate. For example, if I don't vote, if I stay at home, but I have problems with the road in front of my house, it's not being taken care of, the environment, I don't believe the right decisions are being made, I still have the grievances. So if I don't vote, I still am affected by what other people vote for. So certainly we do want people to increase their voter numbers. My friend Shawn said an extremely good point here. He said that if 10 people apply for a job, 9 don't get the job and only 1 does, and that's the very best. That is very true for especially a business and a career opportunity. In elections, the concern is that sometimes 39%, a number like 35 to 30 to 45% may be considered the majority and they may make the government. But 40% is not a majority, 35% is not a majority, sometimes 30% is not a majority either. And we have to preserve that. Are we listening to the concerns of all British Columbians, or is it just a small number whose issues are being heard? And I want to talk about the disenfranchisement of some of the citizens of our great province. For example, there are small parties, such as the Green Party. They get about 16% votes in the recent polls, the most recent, largest poll taken in July, I think by Insight Research. Again, I will list the sources at the end for people to see the various studies on both sides of view. The recent polls show that the BC Greens are at 17%, but they only have 3 seats. That's very, very little compared to how much they should have, which should be, I think, 14 if they were represented fairly in the province. There is the Christian Heritage Party, there is the Libertarian Party, so very traditionalist views and very progressive-minded views. They have no seats at all, but they have thousands of votes. And the issue with that is there are some small ridings. For example, a village, they may elect someone with 500 votes. But the Christian Heritage Party, the Libertarian Party, they have thousands of votes. So if you have thousands of votes as a party and you have no seats in the province, is it really a provincial election or is it a local election? What I mean by that is if a village can elect a provincial candidate with 500 people, but a party that's across BC that has thousands of people doesn't even have 1 seat. So the problem is that it doesn't really sound like a provincial election at all then if people in the province want a party to have representation but they don't get that. And you see that change even in America. We have Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump who are pretty much the most popular politicians. It happens in the FTTP system that the people who are against the establishment can rise to the top. And it also happens in the proportional representation system. Okay. But the easier thing is that in America, there was a bit more violence related to the election because it's tougher for a non-franchise candidate like Donald Trump who only recently joined the Republican Party a few years ago to win compared to Hillary Clinton who has been in her party for decades.
Yes.
In Europe that was not the case because proportional representation systems they allow you to more easily get into power. But there is the concern that will fringe parties such as neo-Nazis or communists, not the ones who look for solutions but the ones who look for violence, are those ever going to be getting representation in our province that we would not want? No, because most of the proportional representation systems, if not all, they do have a 5% threshold. You have to convince a significant number of British Columbians who are, and we are known for being peaceful, loving. You can just see the example from our nature here. The entire world wants to live here because of how beautiful we take care of our wildlife and our ecosystems. We would not be electing any dictators. I don't even think they would get 5% of vote. We could even raise that threshold that you'd have to convince more people.
So that is also quite interesting. So is 5% an optimal number?
That would have to require a study.
Okay.
I believe 5% is an optimal number, but if we would want to raise it as high as 12%, the issue would be that only basically the BC Conservatives, they're a smaller party that doesn't have seats, they might be in competition to get a seat if we say only you have to get 12% of seats across BC to be part of the legislature, part of the proportional representation system. And the smaller parties, Christian Heritage, Libertarian, other parties, they would again be left out. But so we don't want people to be left out.
But would that be possible that they can form their own coalition, reform parties then?
That would have to be established by the rules.
Okay.
As it stands, in proportional representation systems, first the election happens, and then the people sit at the table and decide who's going to team up, who will make the coalitions. And that is actually a problem. That is a flaw of the proportional representation system. If a coalition is made afterwards, people didn't vote for a coalition. They voted for a certain party. And if there's a coalition formed of enemies afterwards, won't the voters feel like their voice wasn't heard? The issues that they wanted might be part of the coalition, but the issues that they were against might also be part of the coalition. And so forming coalitions afterwards is the big flaw of the proportional representation system. But the most advanced, the most latest studies, I quoted Dr. Tillman, he said that it's best to form pre-electoral coalitions. If you are going to form a coalition in a proportional system election, form it before the election. You need to tell people who your teammates are. You don't need to hide that. In this election, in the debates, we heard the BC Liberals and the Greens seem to be agreeing on a lot of things, disagreeing on a lot of things, and both of them were attacking the NDP leader, John Horgan. So watching the debate, I personally thought, okay, it's going to be a coalition between the Liberals and the Greens. That was my opinion. But afterwards, when Horgan and Weaver teamed up, the NDP and the Greens, I was very surprised. And so I think the coalitions, and the professors agree that the coalitions need to happen before the election. That is a big benefit.
Very good point. But however, so Shawn, get back to Shawn. So now, what else do you want to tell the proponents of the proportional representation voting system who want better representation of groups that are currently underrepresented in the legislative assembly?
A system that's simple. This is, the more I'm hearing about this, it's like I'm supposed to be standing up for the current system, and so I'm somewhat biased, but seriously? I went to school for a long time and I did a little bit of political science. This is beyond my, and I have a master's of law, this is beyond my pay grade. I'm not that bright, I admit, but this is beyond my pay grade. Whoa, this is like, it's becoming more and more complicated. Go to polls, make your choice, live with the results. Go, and the bars are closed, unfortunately, on election day. Like in the old days, what they used to do is they used to have the pubs open. The candidate would seriously take you out, get you drunk, and have you go vote. But now that's why pubs are closed on election day. I think they open at 9 when the polls close. But I mean, this is serious. And this happened in British Columbia. True story. True story. So now that it's all closed on, so you can't get people drunk and then get you in to vote for you. But seriously, I think that. This is, as coalitions, for example, what's the difference between a pre-election coalition and the first past the post system, where a group of disparate ideas coalesce together into a group who have ideas? I think the current center-right party, for want of a better word, is in fact a coalition between liberals, conservatives, social credit people, independents, reformers, mavericks, essentially, the more conservative-minded people. The NDP is less openly a coalition between Marxists, Greens, Christian socialists, Fabian socialists, and trade unionists, but it's also a coalition. But it is much more likely to fracture and not necessarily work together should this go through, whereas these 5 people who fight each other at the federal level are quite used to joining together in social credit, BC Liberals, or the old pre-social credit alliance between the Liberals, Conservatives, and others at the time of Boss Johnson and people like that before WAC came along. So I would say that this is going to hurt the people bringing it in far more than the people who are opposing it. But so that's the first thing. The system that is being outlined, the more we go into this, the more complicated this is. We aren't Sweden. We aren't collectivists. We don't live in little apartment buildings, and we don't sit there. We're a different society. We're North America. I mean, now we're being quite urbanized, but we are a maverick, more individualistic society. So I think the collectivism that you see in places like Japan or Sweden, I don't think it works here. I think we have a much more forthright, give you the middle finger if they like it, wear the reverse baseball cap with the gun rack on the back of the pickup truck culture. They'll give you the bird and then they'll invite you out for a beer, and that's just kind of the way it is in small town BC. So I don't know that some of these highfalutin political science ideas are necessarily going to work. And as far as giving people in small groups a bit of a voice, I mean, I think we focus so much on trying to diversify, essentially, break up the legislature and have this group, that group, left-handed, red-handed Irishmen, green vegans, green meat eaters, social democrats, social reformers, well, no fascists, but I mean very far right-wing guys, capitalists, libertarians. And I mean, I don't necessarily think that you're going to have a better legislature for everyone sitting there speaking like a Tower of Babel kind of language. How are you going to draft policies? You're going to come together into some kind of group, largely based on either special interests, personalities, which is very likely to happen in British Columbia, personalities, or ideology. And really, how is that different than the system we have today, where you have groups based either on ideology, the labor, the sort of trades union movements, and the progressive left in one group, and even though half of the trade unions, the C2s, still vote for the other group, the sort of conservative group, the Tory coalition of ambitious sort of lower middle class, aspirational working class, and some of the knobs, so to speak, some of the ruling class, who are kind of the Tory coalition, which has ruled this province for a great deal of its history, whether it's social credit, whether it's the Conservatives, whether it's the BC Liberals. That's the old school Tory coalition. And people who vote for this, I don't see what the difference is in, I think the system we have allows minority views to come forward. I think your duty, I think, as a citizen in this kind of Facebook online democracy that we live in, I think, is to make your views known to your representatives, to put pressure on them. And I think we see with social media the power of social media and the power of people. And I think the Brexit referendum was one of the first examples of the power of social media for the voters to directly talk to each other without the filters of the media establishment, the political establishment, or the elites, be they the aristocracy of labor or the capital sort of capitalist elites. These people talked directly to each other, gave a bird to the establishment, and they voted for Brexit. The Donald Trump was a similar example where he took over the Republican Party. They didn't want him. And he hijacked the Republican Party. He appealed to a lot of voters, and he hopscotched through all those states that he needed to win. So I think it's an example of where you can influence policy. Now, if someone doesn't like something, if there's enough of a backlash, or you go out there and you put this out there and you get enough people to support you, you can influence your legislature. Your voice can be heard. So I think not chopping up the legislature to reflect all these views, but rather making your views known and pressuring those who are there now is a better way to put this out there. Getting this stuff out in the media, getting this stuff out through your social networks is a far better way, I think, of influencing the policy than making sure that every little chopped idea, every convoluted shade of opinion is represented in your legislature. I will say one thing, really, I've reviewed a lot of this stuff, and I've looked at this and I'm thinking they want seats for this group, groups for this. I think British Columbia should consider actually creating a second tier of its parliament. There is a provincial senate in Ontario, and like a provincial council or a provincial senate, in which case then you could appoint people, or you could do what the Australian Senate does. You could elect those on a proportional basis, and I think having some of these various groups at a higher level reviewing legislation is far better than having them at the kind of lower level, the constituent level, doing this. I think it would be a new institution created for a sort of modern British Columbia, and I think it would be a far better idea, and it would cost a bit more money, but I think it's far better than messing around with something which I think is simple, direct, there's cause and effect, and I think it works. As far as why people vote and why people don't vote, I think people don't vote because they don't feel particularly motivated to vote. I think there's genuine, there may be apathy, people may say they're not happy, but I think there's a genuine, reasonable level of satisfaction with the current system. I mean, you have a free election at the civic level, where some places you have parties, some places you don't, but you can, it's a popularity contest in local government, and you have 30% of the people voting. That's pathetic. And at a local level, decisions are made that are far more important to the average person's life than at the provincial level or the Dominion level, the national level, but no one votes. No one votes. And the people really have the power there. They can come out, they can vote. The elections are on weekends. They can choose whomever they want. They're lower. So I don't know that even at the local level where candidates, you can talk to them directly, it isn't working at that level. So I'm not convinced that this convoluted, kind of complicated mishmash of systems is going to deliver a better result. In the end, it's the results. I think we need to engage with people, find a way for having them participate in the system and getting their views out there. But I don't think changing the way you changing the way you put the crooks into Victoria to rob you. I really don't think that is going to change very much. And
now get back to the proposition and Jashan. What do you want to tell the opponents of the proportional representation voting system and who contend that the coalition governments created under PR are less stable?
Okay, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
First, I agree that our new system shouldn't be unrecognizable. I don't want to see a paper that I can't understand. I don't want to see a government of 87 different parties, one for each seat. And the one that is most usually associated with unrecognizable government is the urban-rural proportional representation system, which is not the one I recommend at all. I agree that there should be a second tier of government, some sort of structure in BC studies.
Okay.
I was talking about another sort of government structure in BC that would be regional. And each proportional representation system, it is first the FTTP that decides the initial seat, who wins in your riding. Mm-hmm. But the second seat, or the multiple seats, if people want more than two, would be from the regional vote. The extra seats for a party, for example, if the Greens have won 17% of the vote in the next election as they're polling, and they only have 3 seats in this election, they go to 14. They may again only have 3 seats. That would be the FTTP system, but the other 11 seats would come from regional representation. The parliament would assign those to different regions where they are the most popular, and it would be completely fair. The fractions, everything, the percentages would be taken care of to the decimal, and so people would be able to see a real provincial representation for their views. One issue is that if it is a popularity contest, such as in the FTTP, only the rich can participate. We see upwards of even $100,000 spent in some federal elections. I'm not sure what the figure is in provincials, but it's and how much people are spending in the back. It may be in the millions. We don't want it only the very popular and well-connected people to be participating in politics. And just an example, some of my friends, they know my political views, and the moment they find out, block on Facebook. No matter if I say something very balanced and neutral, if it disagrees with someone, block on Facebook. We're not friends anymore. I don't want that to happen. There are many people sitting in their homes. They don't participate, they don't vote there. They promote violence online, and they break their friendships. And those people, especially to get them to participate, whether they're associated with a small party like the libertarians who are not violent, but any of the other smaller fringe political movements such as the extremist parties, we want the proportional representation system so they get out of their house. If the proportional representation system is implemented, we tell all these people who are promoting violence online or who just have very different views that no one else can understand them, come out. Now you have a real chance to win. We have a 5% threshold. You have to convince 5% of British Columbians. And so if you're promoting, for example, fringe views, like let's say we want British Columbia to only be one group of people, and you want to kick everyone else out, you're not going to win. You need to convince everyone, and British Columbia is a harmonious society. So come out of your house, come out of hiding, come participate, tell us what your concerns are. We want to hear you, we want you to participate, and that is only possible in a proportional representation where they have an access to the government. And immediately, the first effect would be a more peaceful society, in my opinion. People who have extremist views, if they have to go out door to door to campaign and they have to say, these are my views, they're going to have to make friends who don't agree with them. They're going to have to adopt a lot more policies and learn a lot more things about what other people are concerned about, and immediately it would make them part of the community. What we want with any change, if it's the American change that we agree to vote for a leader, if it's a proportional representation change, if it is a regional system like a Senate for British Columbia, ultimately we want more participation. We want people who are hiding to come out. We would like to promote peace in our society, number one, and we want more centrism. Talking about coalitions, again, the studies recommend that if any sort of system, in the proportional representation, for example, if there's a coalition to be made and you talk about stability, that is sometimes an issue. In proportional representation, if there's a coalition of 10 parties, let's say, who is going to blame who if things go wrong? In first past the post, we see usually there's a majority. And this time we had alliance, the Greens have backed the NDP, but we know who to blame. If something goes wrong, we know it's the NDP and the Greens. But if there's 10 parties, all the leaders will blame each other. And that's why the studies show that pre-election coalition is the best. It's less people, because you win an election to represent all people, not just a few people. So whatever we choose going forward, whether it's the American system, an improvement to FTTP, whether it's a proportional system, which is implemented in what are surveyed to be the happiest countries on earth in Northern Europe, or whether it's another sort of system where we create a new Senate, I hope that the two principles, that we want a more peaceful society, that the next studies focus on that we want a more peaceful society, and that we also want a more centrist government. So we don't want fringe to the left, we don't want fringe to the right. We want governments that allow more people to participate in them. We want parties that reach out to more people. And we especially, third, want the people who have been feeling disenfranchised, that they cannot participate. We want them to come out, we want to hear their views, and we want to hear these views incorporated in the main parties and the new rising parties.
Very well said. I think the civic discourse about our electoral reform should not stop, but we must conclude today's discussion. So thank you very much, Mr. Jashan, Singh, and Mr. Shawn Wade for sharing your thoughts with us and our audience.
Thank you very much.
Now, which electoral system should British Columbia use for elections to the Legislative Assembly? Thanks for watching. 说得很好，我们其实这个生活中关于比例制选举的辩论不应该停止，但是我们今天的这个对话节目不得不在这里暂时告一段落。所以谢谢 Jashan Singh 先生和 Shawn 先生，跟我们分享他们对于选举制度的理解和他们的想法。现在就取决于你们了。那么接下去，卑诗省将使用什么样的选举制度来选他们和我们的这个议员呢？谢谢你的收看。
读懂温哥华，从温哥华港湾开始。真正的本地新闻，即时、最热、接地气。玩玩乐乐温哥华，大温一周好去处，各类本地休闲娱乐资讯。舌尖上的温哥华 ，BC 贝原创美食微杂志，打造温哥华美食地图。温哥华港湾，大温最火的中文。